At 1:17 a.m., I caught my wife sneaking out of our guest room with a man's silk tie draped over her shoulder like some twisted trophy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, supposedly fixing our router issues, while Ayla was apparently fixing her own connectivity problems upstairs. My name is Hale Trenwick, and up until 3 months ago, I thought I had a pretty decent handle on my life. 42 years old, recently laid off from a tech startup that burned through venture capital faster than a Ferrari burns premium gas, but still respected enough in Portland's small tech community to keep the freelance work flowing. Married to Ayla for 8 years, living in one of those tree-lined suburban neighborhoods where everyone pretends not to notice each other's business while simultaneously cataloging every detail for the neighborhood app Gossip Mill. If you sneeze wrong in this place, it's trending on Nextdoor within 6 minutes, I muttered to myself, watching Ayla tiptoe down the hallway through the security monitor I'd been pretending to troubleshoot. The thing about being a tech guy married to an ambitious advertising executive is that you tend to notice patterns. Ayla's late nights at the office had increased by roughly 340% since her promotion to senior account manager 3 months ago. Her new fitness routine involved leaving the house at odd hours, wearing clothes that definitely weren't gym appropriate, and then there were the bank statements, cash withdrawals that made no sense for someone who paid for everything with credit cards to rack up rewards points. But the tie. That stupid, expensive-looking tie was the smoking gun I didn't want to find. I'd installed our home security system 6 weeks ago, ostensibly because of the recent break-ins in the neighborhood. What I didn't mention to Ayla was that I'd configured it to capture everything in 4K resolution with cloud backup that she couldn't access. Call it paranoia, call it intuition, or call it the natural suspicion of a man whose wife suddenly started working out at 11 p.m. on weeknights. The footage from the past week painted a picture that would make a soap opera writer proud. Ayla and a man I recognized as Tyler Roane, her boss, married father of 2, owner of a Tesla that cost more than my annual freelance income, had been using our house like their personal romantic getaway. Guest room, garage, even the kitchen counter I'd eaten breakfast on that morning. My hands were surprisingly steady as I copied the files to multiple drives and cloud accounts. Years of debugging code under pressure had taught me to compartmentalize, to focus on the technical task while my emotional processing ran in the background like a system update. The front door opened with its familiar creak. Ayla's heels clicked against the hardwood floor with the careful precision of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. I remained in the kitchen, laptop open, security footage paused on a particularly revealing frame from Tuesday night. Hale? Her voice carried that false sweetness she used when she felt guilty about something. Why are you still up, honey? I didn't turn around. Just fixing the network issues you mentioned. You know how it is? Tech problems don't keep regular business hours. She appeared in my peripheral vision, smoothing down her hair and adjusting her blouse. Oh, you didn't have to stay up for that. I'm sure it could have waited until morning. Actually, I'm glad I stayed up. I discovered some really interesting traffic patterns. I clicked play on the video file. Want to see what I found? The color drained from Ayla's face as she recognized herself on the screen. To her credit, she didn't immediately launch into denials or excuses. She just stood there, watching herself betray our marriage in high-definition clarity. How long have you been recording? She asked quietly. Long enough. I closed the laptop and finally turned to face her. The question is, how long have you been lying? That's when she made her first mistake. Instead of coming clean, instead of apologizing or trying to explain, Ayla went on the offensive. You're spying on me. This is illegal surveillance, Hale. You can't just record people without their consent. I almost laughed. In my own house? Using a security system installed on property I own? Ayla, I may be recently unemployed, but I'm not stupid. I know exactly what's legal and what isn't. Her eyes darted toward the laptop, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She was calculating, strategizing, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. It was the same look she got when presenting campaign strategies to difficult clients. Look, we can work through this, she said, switching to her reasonable negotiator voice. Marriages go through rough patches. We can go to counseling. We can start with you calling Tyler and telling him his wife might be interested in seeing these files. The mask slipped completely. You wouldn't dare. I opened the laptop again and pulled up my email client. Chloe Roane, right? I found her contact information pretty easily. Turns out she's quite active on social media. Lots of photos of family vacations and charity events. She seems nice. Ayla lunged for the laptop, but I'd already hit send. The email, complete with video attachments and a politely worded explanation of the situation, was already traveling through cyberspace toward Tyler's unsuspecting wife. You bastard! Ayla screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. You've ruined everything. No, I said, standing up and closing the laptop again. You ruined everything. I just documented it. She ran toward the home office, probably hoping to access our shared accounts and do some damage control. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Every joint account had been secured, every shared password changed, every digital asset protected. By the time she realized she was locked out of everything, I was already 3 steps ahead. The next morning brought the kind of chaos that makes suburban drama feel like a contact sport. I was enjoying my coffee and monitoring the fallout from my midnight email campaign when Ayla burst into the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, face flushed with panic and rage. No, Daddy, you don't understand, she was saying into the phone. Hale is having some kind of breakdown. He's making up stories and... I held up my tablet, showing her the read receipts from the emails I'd sent to her parents, Tyler's wife, and the HR director at Ayla's advertising agency. Her father had opened his copy at 6:23 a.m. Her mother had forwarded it to 3 other people by 6:45. Actually, Mr. Morrison, I said loudly enough for the phone to pick up, I think you'll find the documentation quite thorough. High-definition video, bank statements, phone records. I've always been detail-oriented. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Ayla ended the call and turned on me with the fury of someone watching their carefully constructed life crumble in real time. You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, I've got news for you, Hale. 2 can play this game. She stormed out, and within an hour, I had my first visitor. Detective Ray Morrison, Ayla's cousin and a 20-year veteran of the Portland Police Department, knocked on my door with the weary expression of a man who'd been dragged into family drama against his better judgment. Hale, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Ayla says you've been conducting illegal surveillance, says you've been harassing her and making threats. I invited him in and offered coffee, which he declined. Ray had always been decent to me, even if he'd never quite warmed up to his cousin's husband who worked in computers and didn't make enough money to satisfy the Morrison family standards. Here's the thing, Ray, I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Everything I've done is completely legal. Property deed showing I own this house, receipts for the security system I purchased and installed, documentation showing Ayla was informed about the cameras when I installed them. Ray flipped through the paperwork with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of domestic disputes. She says you're using the recordings to blackmail her. I'm using the recordings to document adultery for divorce proceedings. There's a difference. I handed him another document. Consultation agreement with Wilder Sornell, attorney at law. Everything's being handled through proper legal channels. As if summoned by his name, Wilder chose that moment to arrive. My best friend since college, Wilder had the kind of dry wit that made him popular at parties and devastating in courtrooms. He also had the advantage of being completely unimpressed by the Morrison family's local influence. Ray, Wilder nodded to the detective, I trust you're here in an unofficial capacity since my client hasn't committed any crimes. Your client has been sharing intimate recordings of his wife, Ray replied, but his tone suggested he was already losing interest in Ayla's version of events. My client has been documenting criminal trespass and adultery occurring on his own property, Wilder corrected. The recordings were made legally, stored securely, and shared only with relevant parties who had legitimate interests in the information. While they talked, I noticed Mrs. Tibbetts from across the street had positioned herself on her front porch with a cup of coffee and her phone. She was definitely recording this conversation, and knowing her social media habits, it would be on Facebook within the hour with a caption like, "Police at the Trenwicks again. What is happening to our quiet neighborhood?" Ray left with a warning to keep things civil, which I interpreted as stop making me deal with your family drama. Wilder stayed for coffee and strategy. How bad is it? I asked. For Ayla? Catastrophic. Her boss received the files around 7 this morning. Tyler's been suspended pending an internal investigation. Chloe Roane has already filed for divorce and is claiming half of everything, plus she's threatening to go public with the affair. And for me? Clean as a whistle. Everything you've done is legal, documented, and justified. The only advice I have is to stay calm and let them make the mistakes. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification from our bank. Someone had attempted to access our joint checking account from an unauthorized device. The attempt had been blocked, and the account was now flagged for suspicious activity. She's trying to clean out our accounts, I told Wilder. Let her try. Every failed attempt is more evidence of her intent to defraud you. He grinned with the satisfaction of a man who loved watching bad people make things worse for themselves. Your wife is about to learn the difference between being smart and being clever. The afternoon brought Tyler Roane to my doorstep, and he was everything I'd expected from Ayla's description of her brilliant, sophisticated boss. Mid-40s, artificially white teeth, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and radiating the kind of arrogance that comes from never having faced real consequences. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my house without invitation. "Actually, we don't," I replied, but I followed him into the living room. "But since you're here, how's your morning going? I heard work got a little complicated." Tyler turned on me with the fury of a man watching his privileged life implode. "You have no idea what you've done. Do you know who I am? Do you understand the kind of connections I have in this city?" "I know you're the married man who's been having an affair with my wife in my house," I said calmly. "Beyond that, I really don't care about your resume." He stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. "This ends now. You're going to delete those files, you're going to call my wife and tell her it was all a misunderstanding, and you're going to disappear from our lives. Or what? Or I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I'll destroy your reputation, your business, everything you've built." I almost felt sorry for him. Tyler was so accustomed to being the most important person in any room that he couldn't comprehend being on the losing side of a conflict. He was still thinking like someone who held all the cards, instead of someone whose wife was currently meeting with divorce attorneys and whose employer was conducting an ethics investigation. "Tyler," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the recording app, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." His eyes widened as he noticed the phone, but he was too angry to stop talking. "You think you can threaten me? You think some unemployed tech nobody can go up against someone like me?" "I think," I said, still recording, "that you're about to add criminal intimidation to your list of problems. I also think you should leave my house before I call the police and report you for trespassing." The reality of his situation finally seemed to penetrate Tyler's arrogance. He looked around my living room as if seeing it clearly for the first time, realizing he was standing uninvited in the home of a man who'd already demonstrated a talent for documentation and a willingness to share that documentation with interested parties. "This isn't over," he said, but the bluster was gone. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You just haven't figured that out yet." After Tyler left, I sent the recording to Wilder and copied Chloe Roane on the email. By evening, Tyler's lawyer had called my lawyer to discuss mutual non-disclosure agreements and amicable resolutions. Wilder's response was succinct. "My client has nothing to hide and nothing to negotiate." The war was just beginning, but the first battles were going exactly according to plan. 3 days after Tyler's visit, I discovered that Ayla had enlisted her entire social network in what she was calling her image rehabilitation campaign. Unfortunately for her, I'd spent the better part of a decade listening to her complain about these same people, and I had a pretty comprehensive understanding of their weaknesses, insecurities, and secrets. My transformation from victim to strategist was surprisingly natural. Years of debugging complex systems had taught me to think in terms of cause and effect, to trace problems back to their source, and to implement solutions that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Ayla's affair wasn't the disease, it was just the most obvious symptom of her fundamental character flaws. The first phase of my counterattack targeted her financial independence. I'd been paying most of our household expenses for years, while Ayla spent her salary on what she called career investments, designer clothes, expensive lunches, spa treatments, and the kind of networking events where people drank overpriced wine and pretended to enjoy each other's company. I canceled her gym membership at the exclusive club where she'd been meeting Tyler. I terminated the lease on her BMW, which had been structured through our joint credit to get better rates. I called her favorite spa and canceled the standing monthly appointments that had been automatically charged to our shared credit card. Each cancellation was perfectly legal and financially justified. We were getting divorced, after all, and I had every right to stop paying for services I'd never agreed to fund indefinitely. But the cumulative effect was to systematically dismantle the lifestyle that Ayla had come to see as essential to her identity. The second phase involved what Wilder called strategic information sharing. Chloe Roane, Tyler's soon-to-be ex-wife, had turned out to be a valuable ally in ways I hadn't expected. She was smart, angry, and had access to Tyler's personal communications that revealed the full scope of his extracurricular activities. "Your wife wasn't his first affair," Chloe told me during one of our coffee meetings. "She wasn't even his most recent. Tyler has a pattern of targeting women at the office who are ambitious and willing to overlook his marriage in exchange for career advancement." She showed me screenshots of text messages between Tyler and at least 3 other women, including a junior account executive who'd been promoted suspiciously quickly 6 months earlier. The pattern was clear. Tyler used his position to manipulate women who were hungry for advancement, then discarded them when he got bored or when the risk of exposure became too high. Ayla thought she was special. Chloe continued. She thought she was going to be the one he left me for. But Tyler would never leave me. I have too much money and too much information about his business practices. Armed with this intelligence, I began reaching out to Tyler's other victims, not to cause drama, but to provide them with information they could use to protect themselves and seek appropriate legal remedies. The junior account executive, Jennifer Walsh, was particularly grateful to learn that her special relationship with Tyler was neither special nor unique. I thought I was crazy, Jennifer told me. He made me feel like I was imagining the quid pro quo, like the promotions and opportunities were based on my merit. But when I tried to end things, he started giving all my projects to other people. Within a week, Tyler was facing not just a divorce and an internal investigation, but potential legal action from multiple women who were comparing notes about his pattern of workplace harassment and manipulation. The third phase was pure psychological warfare, and I have to admit I enjoyed it more than I probably should have. I created a comprehensive timeline of Ayla's affair, complete with receipts, photographs, and documentation. Then I shared it with her parents, her sister, and her closest friends, not as gossip, but as a factual account of events that would inevitably become public during divorce proceedings. Ayla's mother called me personally to express her disappointment in her daughter's choices and to assure me that the family would not be taking sides in the divorce. This was Morrison family code for Ayla is on her own financially, which eliminated her fallback plan of moving in with her parents while she figured out her next move. Her sister Lisa was more direct. I always thought Ayla was selfish, but I never thought she was stupid. Throwing away a marriage for Tyler Roane? That's just embarrassing. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, the junior account executive, had been quietly documenting Tyler's behavior for months as insurance against potential retaliation. She had recordings of him making explicit quid pro quo offers, emails where he discussed manipulating performance reviews, and most damaging of all, a recording of him laughing about how easy it was to manipulate desperate housewives like Ayla, who were willing to risk their marriages for a taste of his lifestyle. He called her pathetic, Jennifer told me. Said she was so hungry for validation that she'd believe anything he told her about leaving his wife. I sat in my kitchen, listening to Tyler's voice describing my wife as a useful distraction and too needy to be worth the long-term risk, and felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Ayla hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd been played by a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient outlet for his ego and his libido. That evening, I called Ayla and asked her to meet me for dinner. She agreed immediately, probably thinking I was ready to discuss reconciliation. Instead, I played her Tyler's recording. She listened to her lover's voice, describing her as pathetic and needy, heard him laughing about how easy she was to manipulate, and watched 8 years of marriage dissolve completely as she realized she'd thrown away everything for a man who saw her as a joke. He didn't mean it, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. He meant every word, I replied. The question is, what are you going to do about it? That night, Ayla tried to break into Tyler's house to confront him. She was arrested for trespassing and spent 6 hours in jail before her cousin Ray could arrange her release. The arrest report was public record, and by morning, everyone in our social circle knew that Hale Trenwick had been taken into custody for stalking her former lover. The war was no longer about my marriage. It was about completely dismantling the lives of two people who had treated me like a disposable obstacle to their happiness. And I was winning. 2 weeks into what I'd started calling Operation Accountability, Chloe Roane presented me with an opportunity that was too perfect to ignore. Her family owned a lakeside mansion that they used for charity events and corporate retreats, the kind of venue that attracted Portland's social elite and provided the perfect stage for public drama. I'm hosting a fundraiser next Saturday, Chloe explained during our weekly strategy meeting. Annual charity auction for the Children's Hospital. All the right people will be there, including everyone who matters in Ayla's professional and social circles. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would invite Ayla and Tyler under the pretense of allowing them to address the rumors and clear the air with their community. What they would actually encounter was a carefully orchestrated presentation of evidence that would destroy their reputations in front of everyone who mattered to them. Are you sure about this? Wilder asked when I outlined the plan. It's legal, but it's also nuclear. There's no coming back from something like this. Good, I replied. I don't want them to come back from this. The guest list read like a directory of Portland's professional and social establishment. Tyler's colleagues from the advertising agency, Ayla's former clients, her college friends who'd made good marriages and successful careers, the country club crowd she'd always desperately wanted to impress, and the charity board members who controlled access to the kind of social events that Ayla considered essential to her identity. I spent the week preparing a multimedia presentation that would have impressed my former colleagues at the tech startup. High-definition security footage, financial records showing the pattern of deception, screenshots of text messages between Tyler and his multiple affairs, and audio recordings of both Tyler and Ayla discussing their plans to manipulate their respective spouses. But the centerpiece was Tyler's recording about Ayla being pathetic and too needy to be worth the long-term risk. I'd edited it into a short loop that captured his contempt perfectly, and I planned to play it at maximum volume through the mansion's professional sound system. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Maine look like a postcard. I arrived at the mansion early to help Chloe set up the audio-visual equipment, and I have to admit I felt a surge of anticipation as I tested the projectors and speakers. "You know," Chloe said, adjusting the microphone levels, "I've been planning Tyler's downfall for longer than you've been planning Ayla's. He's been cheating on me for years, but I needed the right moment to destroy him completely. And this is that moment? This is that moment." She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Tyler thinks he's untouchable because of his connections and his reputation. Tonight, we're going to show everyone exactly who he really is. The guests began arriving at 7, and I watched from the catering area as Portland's elite filed into the mansion's main reception hall. These were people who valued reputation above almost everything else, who understood that social standing was a currency more valuable than money, and who would remember tonight's events for years to come. Ayla arrived at 7:30, wearing a dress I'd never seen before and looking nervous but determined. She'd clearly prepared for this evening as if it were a job interview, probably hoping to charm her way back into everyone's good graces through sheer force of personality. Tyler arrived separately, which was smart but ultimately pointless. He wore his most expensive suit and his most confident smile, working the room like the social predator he'd always been. I watched him shake hands and make small talk, completely unaware that he was attending his own professional funeral. At 8 o'clock, Chloe took the microphone to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system I'd configured. "Before we begin the auction, I'd like to address some recent events that have affected several members of our community." The room fell quiet with the anticipation of people who sensed drama approaching. "Many of you have heard rumors about infidelity and workplace harassment involving my husband Tyler and Ayla Trenwick. Rather than allow speculation to continue, we've decided to present the facts and let you draw your own conclusions." I activated the projection system, and the first image appeared on the large screens positioned around the room. It was a photograph of Tyler and Ayla entering our house together, timestamp clearly visible, taken from our security system. Ayla gasped audibly. Tyler started moving toward the exit, but Chloe had positioned security guards at all the doors, not to prevent anyone from leaving, but to ensure that anyone who left would have to walk past the screens showing their behavior. "This presentation contains adult content," Chloe announced, "but nothing more explicit than what passes for entertainment on premium cable networks. However, if you prefer not to see documentation of adultery and workplace harassment, you're free to leave." Nobody left. Portland's social elite were many things, but they weren't about to miss the scandal of the decade. For the next 20 minutes, I systematically destroyed both Tyler and Ayla's reputations. Security footage showed the scope and duration of their affair. Financial records revealed Tyler's pattern of using company resources to fund his extramarital activities. Text messages demonstrated Ayla's willingness to betray not just her marriage, but her friendships, as she'd shared private information about mutual acquaintances with Tyler for his amusement. But the climax was Tyler's recording calling Ayla pathetic and describing her as a useful distraction. I played it 3 times, each repetition driving the point home more effectively than any speech I could have given. The room was completely silent except for Tyler's voice explaining how easy it was to manipulate desperate women who were hungry for validation. When the presentation ended, I took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention tonight. Some of you have asked me how I'm handling this situation, whether I'm angry or hurt or looking for revenge. The truth is, I'm not looking for revenge anymore. I found it." I gestured toward Tyler and Ayla, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. These two people decided that my marriage, Tyler's marriage, and their professional reputations were acceptable casualties in their pursuit of whatever it is they thought they were pursuing. Tonight, you've seen exactly who they are and what they're capable of. I trust you'll remember that in your future dealings with them. The crowd began to murmur, and I could see people pulling out their phones to text and post about what they'd just witnessed. By morning, Everyone in Portland's professional community would know exactly what had happened tonight. Tyler tried to approach the microphone, probably to offer some kind of explanation or defense, but Chloe stepped in front of him. "Tyler," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "your lawyer will receive divorce papers on Monday morning. Your employer will receive copies of everything we've shown tonight, along with documentation of your other affairs and your misuse of company resources. And your children will receive age-appropriate explanations of why Daddy won't be living with us anymore." She turned to address the crowd. "The charity auction will continue as scheduled. However, I should mention that Tyler will no longer be in a position to honor any pledges he might make tonight, as his assets are currently being frozen pending divorce proceedings." That's when Tyler made his final mistake. Instead of leaving quietly, instead of trying to preserve what little dignity he had left, he decided to confront me directly. "You think you've won?" he snarled, pushing through the crowd toward me. "You think destroying my reputation makes you some kind of hero." "I think," I replied calmly, "that you destroyed your own reputation. I just provided documentation." He swung at me, a clumsy, desperate punch that I easily avoided. Tyler stumbled forward, off balance, and I caught his wrist in a grip that stopped his momentum without actually hurting him. "Tyler," I said quietly, so only he could hear, "you're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone who matters to your career. I'd suggest you leave while you still have the option of walking out under your own power." He tried to pull away, but I held his wrist just long enough to make my point clear. When I released him, he stumbled backward into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The crash was spectacular, and the room erupted in nervous laughter. Security escorted Tyler out while he shouted threats about lawyers and lawsuits. Ayla followed him, sobbing and trying to apologize to anyone who would listen. Nobody was listening. As the evening wound down and the auction proceeded without further drama, Chloe found me on the mansion's back deck, looking out over the lake. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Satisfied," I replied. "For the first time in months, I feel completely satisfied." "Good," she said, "because this is just the beginning. Tyler's going to spend the next 5 years dealing with divorce proceedings, workplace harassment lawsuits, and professional ostracism. Ayla's going to discover that her reputation was the only thing propping up her career. And us? We're going to rebuild our lives without the people who treated us like obstacles to their happiness." I looked out over the lake, watching the moonlight reflect off the water, and realized that I'd finally reached the end of my marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. It felt like waking up from a long, unpleasant dream. The aftermath of the charity event unfolded exactly as I'd predicted, but with a few complications that reminded me why I'd always preferred debugging code to managing human drama. Tyler hired an expensive lawyer and threatened to sue everyone involved in what he called a coordinated campaign of harassment and defamation. Ayla moved in with her sister and started telling anyone who would listen that I'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. The problem with their strategy was that everything we'd presented was true, documented, and legally obtained. Tyler's lawyer quickly discovered that threatening to sue someone for sharing factual information about adultery and workplace harassment was a losing proposition, especially when that information had been gathered legally and presented in a public forum. Ayla's claims about being framed fell apart when Wilder released the full timeline of events, including security footage that clearly showed her bringing Tyler into our house on multiple occasions. Her sister Lisa called me personally to apologize for Ayla's behavior and to assure me that the family wouldn't be supporting her version of events. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, the junior account executive who'd been documenting Tyler's harassment, filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Within days, 3 other women came forward with similar stories, and Tyler's employer launched a comprehensive investigation that resulted in his immediate termination. "He's finished," Wilder told me during our weekly check-in. "No advertising agency in the city will touch him after this. He'll be lucky to find work managing a used car lot." "And Ayla?" "Her employer is conducting their own investigation. Apparently, several clients have complained about her behavior in recent months. The affair with Tyler explains a lot of the questionable decisions she's been making." I should have felt satisfied. Tyler and Ayla were facing exactly the kind of consequences that their behavior deserved. Their reputations were destroyed, their careers were over, and their social standing had evaporated completely. By any reasonable measure, my revenge was complete and successful. But something was bothering me, a nagging sense that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Chloe had been too prepared, too strategic, too perfectly positioned to orchestrate Tyler's downfall. Her family's mansion, her connections to the social elite, her access to Tyler's communications, it all seemed too convenient to be coincidental. The answer came during what I thought would be our final strategy meeting. Chloe and I were sitting in her lawyer's office, reviewing the divorce settlements and discussing the transfer of assets, when she made a comment that stopped me cold. "You know, Hale, I have to thank you for providing the perfect opportunity to end Tyler's career. I've been planning this for almost 2 years, but I needed the right catalyst to make it look organic." "What do you mean?" She smiled with the satisfaction of someone revealing a particularly clever magic trick. "I mean, I've been feeding Tyler information about your marriage for months. I'm the one who suggested he pursue Ayla more aggressively. I'm the one who encouraged him to use your house for their meetings." The room felt like it was tilting. "You orchestrated the affair?" "I orchestrated Tyler's downfall. The affair was just the mechanism." Chloe leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed. "Tyler was going to cheat eventually. He always does. I just made sure he cheated in a way that would give me maximum leverage when I decided to destroy him." "And Ayla?" "Collateral damage. She made her own choices, Hale. I just provided her with opportunities to make bad ones." I stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was telling me. "You used me." "I partnered with you. There's a difference." She pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. "Everything Tyler did to you and Ayla, he's done to other women. Everything Ayla did to your marriage, she was capable of doing with or without Tyler's influence. I didn't create their character flaws. I just provided them with enough rope to hang themselves." The folder contained documentation going back 3 years. Tyler's previous affairs, his pattern of workplace harassment, his misuse of company resources, and most damaging of all, evidence that he'd been embezzling from client accounts to fund his lifestyle. "This is why you wanted him destroyed," I realized. Not because of the affairs, but because of the embezzlement. The affairs were personal. The embezzlement was criminal. Chloe closed the folder. "Tyler stole almost $200,000 from accounts I managed. If that had come to light during a normal divorce proceeding, I could have been implicated as an accessory." "So you needed him to be discredited completely before the financial investigation began?" "Exactly. A man who's been publicly exposed as a serial cheater and workplace predator doesn't have much credibility when he tries to claim his wife was involved in his financial crimes." I felt like I was looking at myself from outside my body, seeing clearly for the first time how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Chloe had identified me as the perfect weapon to destroy Tyler. Smart enough to gather evidence, angry enough to pursue revenge, and naive enough to think I was in control of the situation. "You played me," I said quietly. "I gave you exactly what you wanted," she corrected. "Tyler and Ayla destroyed, their reputations ruined, their careers ended. The fact that it also served my purposes doesn't diminish your satisfaction." She was right, and that was the most disturbing part of the revelation. I had gotten exactly what I wanted. Tyler and Ayla were facing appropriate consequences for their behavior. Justice had been served, even if it had been orchestrated by someone with her own agenda. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we go our separate ways. You rebuild your life without Ayla, I rebuild mine without Tyler, and we both move forward with the knowledge that we're capable of protecting ourselves when necessary." Chloe stood up and extended her hand. "It's been a pleasure working with you, Hale. I hope you find whatever comes next more satisfying than what you left behind." I shook her hand, still processing the complexity of what had just been revealed. I'd thought I was the architect of my revenge, but I'd actually been a carefully managed participant in someone else's much larger plan. Walking out of the lawyer's office, I realized that I didn't actually mind being manipulated. Chloe had been right. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted, and the methods had been legal, justified, and effective. Tyler and Ayla had made their own choices, and they were facing appropriate consequences for those choices. The manipulation didn't invalidate the justice. That evening, I received a final text message from Ayla. "I know you think you've won, but destroying my life doesn't make you a better person." I typed and deleted several responses before settling on the truth. "I didn't destroy your life, Ayla. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." She didn't respond, and I didn't expect her to. Our marriage was over, our shared life was dismantled, and we were both free to discover who we were without each other. I poured myself a drink and sat on my back deck, looking out over the neighborhood where everyone now knew exactly what had happened to the Trenwick marriage. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next. Tonight, I was content to sit in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The house felt different without Ayla's presence. Not empty, but clean. Like a system that had been purged of corrupted files and was finally running efficiently again. My phone buzzed with a notification from the security system. Motion detected at the front door. I checked the camera feed and saw a delivery truck dropping off an envelope. Inside was a check from Chloe, my share of the assets recovered from Tyler's embezzlement investigation. There was also a note. Thank you for being exactly who I needed you to be. I laughed out loud, probably the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. Chloe was right. I had been exactly who she needed me to be. But she had also been exactly who I needed her to be. Sometimes the best revenge is the kind where everyone gets what they deserve, even if they don't get it, for the reasons they think they do. I raised my glass to the empty house, to the end of my marriage, and to the beginning of whatever came next. Here's to being exactly who we need to be, I said to no one in particular. The house didn't answer, but for the first time in months, the silence felt comfortable.